We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to start. We'll make this work with the sound. So our talk this afternoon is mission work and relational networking. What does that mean? So let's start with a study that was done by Harvard University on adult development. So basically they studied 724 men over a period of 75 years. And one of the things that they wanted to find out is what makes people happy. So if they were to study these persons' lives for 75 years, over this period of time, what was the indicator towards happiness? And during this study, there were three very important conclusions that were reached. One of them is that strong social connections or a strong relational network equaled a happier, longer, physical, healthier person. Isn't that interesting? It was not so much anything else than the network, the relational network that these people kept that translated towards happier, healthier individuals. Then the second point that they found out, or I need to move on. The second thing that they discovered was that the quality of these close relationships, that was what really mattered. So it was not just about knowing that this person is my brother or knowing that this person is my sister or knowing that this person is my friend. It was actually the quality of that relationship that determined that those that were most satisfied at the age of 50, they were healthier at the age of 80. So if you are 50 years of age and they measured these 724 men and they measured their contentment, their quality of relationships that they lived in, and they then did this, or a couple of 30 years later, they asked the same men again. Those that had good quality relationships at 50 were happier and healthier at 80. And then the last thing was that they actually found a physiological component with regards to a good relational network. And that was that trusting relationships translated to sharper memory at old age. Isn't that interesting? So basically, people who leaned into relationships were happier and healthier individuals, not just physically, but emotionally and even cognitively. Then good relationship keeps us happier and healthier was the conclusion of this study. What are the markers of a good relationship? When we talk about a good relationship, what does that mean? First, there needs to be trust. Think about your own relationships. If you were to qualify your relationship, what are some of the markers that would indicate that this is a good relationship? And that trust needs to be there. There needs to be commitment. There needs to be reciprocity, meaning that it is not just one way. It's not only one person that's giving or receiving, but that there is a movement that is taking place. Then, ultimately, this movement, because you can be giving and giving and giving, but it needs to be fair. There needs to be fairness in our relationships. The expectations need to be managed. The roles need to be understood. So then when we get to support as well, that is very important. And then a sense of belonging, they found out are good markers for a good relationship. Now, this study was done at a university in our time, but we find that this is not something new, is it? There's not some new discovery. That the Bible teaches these very same principles to us. We find that trust is essential within Scripture. What's another word that we can use for trust? Faith. So it has the same Greek. Faith, trust is the same type of connection that we need to have. Now, the Bible teaches in Psalms 57, when I am afraid, I put my trust in you. You keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. From the very beginning, trust is essential. Commitment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. Then the other marker was reciprocity. Call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you and you will honor me. Do we see that this goes both ways? Then when he calls out to me, I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. There's a call and there's a response. Then we have fairness. We understand God to be a just God. Blessed are they who observe justice, who do righteousness at all times. Balance and scales belong to, I love this one. Balance and scales belong to the Lord. Every weight in the sack is his concern. What about support? And I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. And we urge you, brothers, admonish the idle, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all. Relationships, relational networks, good relationships, they find their source in the Word of God, because it is the way in which God relates to us that will ultimately inform how we relate to one another. When we think of a sense of belonging, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And then a greater love is no one than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. Wow, isn't that a beautiful way of putting where we are standing with God? Friends. So now we have this reciprocity, fairness. These are all concepts that are markers of a good relationship. And a good relationship translates into healthier human beings, happier human beings. Now, the greatest pandemic that we are currently facing is not COVID. The greatest pandemic that we are facing is actually loneliness. I see that there's a slide missing there. But the greatest pandemic that we are facing is actually loneliness. And did you know that loneliness can be as deadly as being a chain smoker? Can be as deadly as obesity. Can be as deadly as inactivity, being inactive in your life. A recent study had showed that social isolation was associated with about 50% increase of a risk of dementia. Being lonely affects us on so many levels. Now, if you notice this comparison that we have created in terms of good relationships and what that translates to, physiological for us as human beings, psychological, all these components that make us humans, as opposed to loneliness, which is ever increasing within our society. I would like us to follow this reasoning. If good relationships equals healthy and happier human beings, and a lack of good relationships, which we call loneliness, affects 33% of adult population. Let's make that practical. If we have 3 aisles here. Now, I know the middle aisle might have a little bit more but basically that entire aisle suffers from loneliness. Now, the question that we need to ask ourselves, if loneliness is so prevalent, and if relationships, good relationships, translates to healthy human beings, then surely the gospel needs to affect relationships. Does that make sense? We have Deuteronomy 31 verse 8 that tells us, I will never leave you nor forsake you. That is a God that wants to be in a relationship with us, that wants to have a committed relationship to us, that wants this relationship to have trust, that wants this relationship to have reciprocity. When you call, I will answer. When I call, you will answer. That's what God longs for us. Now, here's the crux of the matter. Since 1965, there have been about 35 million Seventh-day Adventists baptized, church members. Of those 35 million, 13.7 million have chosen to leave the church again in this same period. That's 40% of people that come into the church leave it again. 4 out of 10 people. That's basically this half from here, that side. After being baptized, leave the church again. We call it the back door to the. Now the question is, what are the reasons why people leave the church? Perhaps I can quickly ask, who can guess what is the main reason why people leave the church? Sorry? I'm not going to find out. Let's see if you guessed right. Marital issues. What about the 7? Perceived hypocrisy of church members. Lack of friends within the church. High level of conflict in the local church. Other family conflicts. Conflict with other members. Why isn't there anything about doctrines or anything about, tithe or how the tithe is used or anything like that? How can we summarize these things? Bad relationships. Would you agree with me? There's a graph of others, and you will find that I think it's only at 9th place that you will find that there's some or other rejection of church doctrine. It's a 9th place. The rest of them are all relational, interpersonal issues. There's a story of a lady that visited a church. And this church was very much a model church. And afterwards, being there a couple of times, she knew everything about the health message. And one of the things that she asked me was, but where's the vitamin K? Now, I don't know, I'm not a biologist or anything like that. I don't think you have something that's vitamin K, or I didn't learn about it at school. But I asked, but what do you mean? And she said, where's the kindness? I know everything. I know everything. But what I'm experiencing within our lifestyle is a lack of vitamin K. So to summarize where we are now, before we go to the next part, 2 things we have learned. The promise of the gospel is contained in the biblical teaching of good relationships. If we want to ask, what makes the gospel special? It is that it allows us to be in a good relationship, a significant relationship with God and with those that we live in relationship with. If you were to ask, what's the power of the gospel? And somebody says, it has changed my life. I don't drink anymore. But what does that mean if you drink it alone and you're there in your corner? No, it's because once I drink, I hit my wife. Or I make life miserable for the people around me. The Lord has delivered me. My relationships are looking better. Think about this. The gospel is good news because it makes life better. It brings a peace that surpasseth, I always struggle with that word, all understanding. It's because it can remedy things that we thought were broken forever. It can bring children back to their parents. It can bring loved ones back to each other that trust might have been broken. That's the power of the gospel. But then we sit with the other side. We lose 4 out of 10 people due to unhappiness as a result of bad relationships within our church. How do we bring these 2 together, we ask? I would like us to think about evangelism as a disposition of loving people. The relational network that we live in becomes significant because we love people. We want to bring them the gospel because we love them as Christ has loved us. Why? How can we cultivate this love? And one of the principles that I want to leave with you is what we were created from. What were we created from? Not what are we created in, what were we created from? Is there anyone here that was not created from dust? That if we were to lie you in your grave and in 50 years, somehow we were to look there, it is gold that is there, not dust. All of us have been created from the same substance. And the significance is that when Cain killed his brother, the first murder to take place, the first bad relationship, apart from Adam and Eve with the fall of sin, when the effects of sin now really kicked in, what did God call him to? He said, the blood cries out from the dust, the Adamah, the same substance, the same word that is used that we were created from. It calls out from there. Then that would not be significant in of itself because the blood would have dripped on the ground. But if you understand that in every instance of injustice that takes place, there's a reference to the dust that we have been created, the ground that we have been created from. When we look at God calling Moses from the burning bush, what did God tell Moses? Take off your shoes, for this is holy Adamah, holy ground. Why would you want to take off your shoes? What made this holy ground? You see, just before that, God says, I have seen, I've heard, I've actually, and the words that are used there says that it is not some report I received from an angel, that the light that was reflected from my children there was what went into my eye. God says, I've seen the hurt of my people, the injustice committed towards my people. And I'm calling you, take off your shoes, Moses. Feel the ground between your feet. Remember that these are also your people. These are your brothers. These are your sisters. The Adamah. It's only when we realize our interconnectedness, the fact that we are responsible for one another, that we are able to approach evangelism with a disposition of loving people. I would need 3 volunteers in conclusion. 3 volunteers to please come to the front. I won't embarrass you, I promise. You don't have to talk. I can't do it by myself, so I just need 3 volunteers. We have 1, we have 2. There's another one, please, 3. You can stand here in the front for me. Just watch out for these things. And you can stand there. I want you to do the following. I'll come back to this. I can do that. Just stand facing each other. Okay. Put out your hands. Now put them into it. Yeah, put them there. Yes. This brother is standing hand in hand with this sister. At the same time, he's standing hand in hand with that brother. The same applies for this sister. The same applies for that brother. Now there's a concept, coram deo, that you can see there that says, at the same time I'm standing hand in hand with God, I'm standing hand in hand with my brother. At the same time I'm standing hand in hand with my brother, I'm standing hand in hand with God. You may go and have a seat. We can never forget that principle when we engage evangelism. That the love that God has for us is the same love that He asks us to cultivate. He doesn't ask us to go and do it by ourselves. He says, I'm showing you how it looks. Show it to those around us. We have a responsibility towards our brothers and our sisters. God is asking us today to take off our feet, not take off your feet, take off your shoes, your sandals, stand in the dust, wiggle your toes, feel, understand that we belong to each other, irrespective of how the years may have made us look different. When we look back, when we are in our grave, we end up looking the same over a period of time. It's because we are responsible for one another, accountable to each other. Jesus in Matthew 25, verse 31 to 46, when the sheep and the goat are separated, and they are asked, but why why is there two groups? Jesus says, when I was hungry, you fed me. You didn't feed me. When I was naked, How does that make sense if it is not that we are standing in Coram Deo? Because when I feed the poor, it's not Jesus that I'm feeding. That's not what Jesus was teaching there. He says it's because we belong to each other. Our interconnected, the fact that you are my children, that is your brother, your sister, that when you feed, when you build good relationships, you're actually doing it to me. And you can't separate those two. You can't have a beautiful relationship with me, but have bad relationships with my children. Let us have a disposition of loving people when it comes to evangelism. Thank you.